Yeah, I want to have a little bit of a discussion about weeds. And what I want to get into is the fact that weeds are taking on a different value right now. The discussion is that, weeds covering bare dirt is way better than not having something in the ground covering the earth. So what I've done is I walked through my garden and I picked maybe 10, 15 of my typical weeds. I got a really tough grass. I got some blackberry growing. The typical weeds you'd have in Canada. It's crazy. We have the same weeds here in Ecuador that we have in Canada or US. There's these viney ones that are very easy to pull out. This guy's very easy to pull out. And we have one weed here that is two weeds that are pretty aggressive towards us. And that is the horsetail. And we have this jumping weed. It has these little seeds that as soon as you touch them, they jump. We have those in Canada as well. So the discussion I want to have is the gardener analyzing by walking through the garden and say, this is my trouble that I have and how do I deal with it? So the first thing I always do is I classify my weeds. How aggressive are they? How easy are they to pull out? How prolific are their seed heads? So you go through the math and you say, okay, so this horsetail is bothering me. So I'm going to spend an hour and I'm going to go through the garden and I'm going to pull out every single horsetail. And of course, I'm going to not get the roots out because it goes so deep. But at least I'm slowing the horsetail down. A lot of the times when you pull the root out or the head off, the root doesn't make it. What I'm getting at is try to create a weed management plan. Sounds complicated, but just keep it very simple. Eradicate species that are aggressively trying to overtake your garden. And that also is, there's lots of plants that classify that aren't weeds that do the same thing. They'll take over your garden, so you got to be very careful. So this idea of analyzing invasive plants, controlling them in such a way that they don't take over your garden, that they don't blow up their seed heads all over your garden, that they don't send down these massive roots that you can never get rid of. It's pretty much a scenario where if a weed doesn't hurt your garden extensively, then you can leave it. Now, when somebody says to you, you leave the weeds in your garden because they're beneficial to the soil, they're beneficial to the plants that are surrounding that weed, then what happens is it triggers gardeners that are control freaks that want their garden spotless, they want all their beds spotless, and you have to sort of say to yourself, okay, so if I spend all the energy that I place on weeding, if I spend that on watering or planting new plants or, using the very limited time I have in my garden in a better way than weeding, then maybe the balance sheet will say to you, you know what, I got to pay less attention to weeding and more attention to seeding. There is another really important scenario. So you have this walkway with these cracks in it. Now, if these cracks didn't have any plants in them, then the weeds would take over. So there's another theory about weeding is occupying the space with beneficial plants. The moment you have a bed that is occupied by plants that you want, then all of a sudden the weeds are secondary. They will show up in such a way that they're, a weed here, a weed there, because first of all, the beneficial plants are covering out the space. They're covering the sunlight. They are doing many things to keep the weeds out. And one way to get around that is to have diversity in your garden, which I always praise, but you'll have 5 of those plants together. And then you have your next plant beside it. So there's this diversity, but you still have the same species occupying, 50 square centimeters. So that really helps with your weeding. So the next time you're in your garden spending all this time weeding, think about the weeds that are really aggressive and maybe try to just pull them out and leave the rest of the weeds for when you're going to cultivate the bed again or whatever it may be. The scenario of bare dirt versus weeds, I would always leave the weeds until you're going to go in there and seed it or plant it. Don't take out weeds that are covering bare dirt that you're not going to plant for a long time. Just pick the seeds heads off, pick those really nasty weeds out, and leave the rest until you're ready to cultivate that area.